Tonight on Beyond Borders Network, Europe's biggest powers push back on Washington's Ukraine peace blueprint. The United Kingdom, Germany, and France have drafted a sweeping counterproposal, reshaping everything from military limits to reconstruction funding. A plan that challenges U.S. priorities. A plan that reframes Ukraine's future. And a plan that could redefine Europe's role in global security. This is Beyond Borders Network. I'm Casty Dampson. Let's go deeper. The United States recently circulated a 28-point peace proposal aimed at bringing an end to the war in Ukraine, but the draft immediately triggered a wave of concern across Europe. Washington's version places a strict limit on Ukraine's armed forces, proposes conditions that could shape territorial negotiations, and raises questions about NATO's long-term posture. To many European governments, the U.S. draft felt imbalanced. Too restrictive on Ukraine, not restrictive enough on Russia, and potentially destabilizing for Europe's own security. And so, the United Kingdom, Germany, and France, often called the E3, wrote their own counterproposal. A detailed, structured, legally oriented blueprint that directly challenges some key American assumptions. At the heart of the disagreement are four major problems. First, Ukraine's military size. The U.S. draft suggests limiting Ukraine's army to a number many Europeans believe is too small to prevent future invasions, especially given its long border with Russia. Another problem, territorial negotiation rules. Washington leans toward predefining certain areas as effectively outside Kyiv's control. Europe rejects this, insisting that Ukraine's sovereignty remains intact and that negotiations must start from the current line of contact, not from predetermined losses. Thirdly, NATO ambiguity. The U.S. plan hints at permanently blocking Ukraine from joining NATO. Europe calls that unacceptable, saying any decision must follow the alliance's internal process, not external pressures. Finally, economic and reconstruction concerns. The U.S. plan includes policing the use of frozen Russian assets in ways Europeans believe could complicate Ukraine's long-term recovery. Europe wants a cleaner, coordinated financial pathway, one built for stability, not short-term political wins. In short, Europe sees the U.S. draft as incomplete, potentially risky, and lacking long-term guarantees. And that sets the stage for what comes next. To solve these problems, the E3 powers crafted a counterproposal, a structured, multi-layer plan aimed at preserving Ukraine's sovereignty while creating a realistic path toward de-escalation. Here's what Europe puts on the table. Firstly, a clear commitment to sovereignty. The European draft begins with a firm statement. Ukraine is a sovereign nation with full territorial integrity. This is non-negotiable and it forms the backbone of every other clause. Moving on, a revised military framework. Instead of Washington's lower troop number, the European plan allows Ukraine a larger standing army, better suited to defend its borders in peacetime. This number is higher, more flexible, and seen as essential for preserving deterrence. At the same time, Europe rules out permanent NATO bases in Ukraine during peacetime. This is meant to stabilize regional tensions without compromising Ukraine's right to self-defense. Another proposal is a credible security guarantee. Europe proposes that Ukraine receive a legally binding security guarantee, one that resembles NATO's Article 5 strength, but tailored specifically to the current conflict. It's not symbolic. It's not vague. It's a written commitment that aggression would be met with a coordinated response. Another one is a comprehensive reconstruction plan. Europe envisions a Ukraine development fund backed by major financial institutions. The goal: rebuild infrastructure, modernize critical industries, and reestablish Ukraine's long-term economic stability. Frozen Russian assets would be used only after clear compensation mechanisms are defined, ensuring accountability rather than opportunism. Finally, long-term dialogue with Russia and NATO. Finally, Europe suggests a continuous diplomatic track between Russia and NATO, aimed at reducing future escalation risks. This doesn't remove accountability, but it does establish channels for long-term stability. So why do many experts think the European counter-proposal could gain traction, and what doubts remain? 1. European unity. The UK, Germany, and France rarely align so tightly on major security documents. Their unity alone gives this draft significant weight. 2. Strategic realism. Europe has lived with the consequences of the war most directly, from energy disruption to refugee inflows. Their perspective reflects long-term stability, not short-term election cycles. 3. balanced military vision. Analysts say Europe's proposed military cap feels realistic, enforceable, and defensible, unlike the lower limit criticized as potentially dangerous. 4. Strong economic backing. The reconstruction element addresses what happens after a ceasefire. Without concrete economic support, even the best peace deals collapse. Europe's plan aims to prevent that. 5. Humanitarian impact. The inclusion of structured committees for civilian return, detainees, and missing persons is widely viewed as essential for building trust. But serious doubts remain. 1. Russia's acceptance. It's unclear whether Moscow would accept starting negotiations from the current line of contact without preset territorial gains. 2. Enforcement. Legal mechanisms are strong on paper, but difficult to execute during high-tension periods. 3. US-EU alignment. Having two competing drafts means finding a compromise may take months. If Washington and Europe can't agree, negotiations could stall. 4. Ukrainian domestic pressures. Ukrainian leaders must balance foreign proposals with public expectations. Any perception of forced concession could trigger political backlash. So what happens next, and what does this mean for the world? Short-term outcome. The European plan increases diplomatic pressure and introduces a more structured alternative to the US draft. This forces negotiators to reconcile two visions, potentially leading to a hybrid plan. Medium-term outlook. If the European draft influences the final peace framework, Ukraine retains stronger defense capabilities. Reconstruction becomes a coordinated global effort first. Accountability is embedded into the agreement complete. NATO's future relationship with both Ukraine and Russia becomes more predictable. Long-term global impact. A successful, enforced peace plan could reshape the security architecture of Europe for decades. It could redefine how frozen assets are used in future conflicts. It could create a new model of war-ending agreements, one backed not just by diplomacy, but by legal and economic structures. And it could establish Europe as a more independent strategic actor, no longer relying solely on American frameworks for global security issues. Europe's counterproposal is bold, detailed, and deeply strategic. But whether it becomes the foundation of peace or just another draft in a long conflict depends on the choices world leaders make in the weeks ahead. We'll continue following every development. I'm Casty Dampson. This is Beyond Borders Network, where global stories meet global minds. Stay informed, stay curious. And as always, we look beyond borders.